basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help that kid dive into gratitude and for them to tell me something that they're proud of. Because when you train a kid to do that, because we're always looking for the negative as human beings, but if we can train a kid day in and day out to look for the good, right? A high point moment, something that we're proud of, that's going to train that kid into gratitude.
Welcome to the Generation Youth Podcast. I am James, the host. And if you're a dad or you know a dad, which is going to be everybody who's listening or watching this is going to fall into one of those two categories, you need to pay attention to what we're talking about today. Because I'm grateful to have a new friend, Larry, to join us today. Larry, welcome to the Generation Youth Podcast.
What's going on, brother? It's good to be here, man.
Well, you've got such an extensive biography of what you do to empower men that I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience and share with them. Because I'm going to be frank, my audience gets tired of hearing James talk all the time. They'd rather hear from my guest than from me. So if you wouldn't mind, take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure, man. So I'm a husband first, father as well, and so I'm a father to 4 boys. I have an 18-year-old, 16-year-old, 10-year-old, and 8-year-old. My house is full of energy and shenanigans and craziness, but I wouldn't change it for the world, man. I absolutely love it. As far as like marriage goes, I mean, we've been married now. This will be year 21 for us, which is crazy. It's crazy because, to be honest, if it wasn't for doing what I'm doing, I can probably say with full faith that I would be divorced because my wife probably wouldn't have tolerated me as long as she did. As far as like what we do in Dad Edge and why I started it. I mean, I was lost as a father, over a decade ago, and I just didn't know what I was doing. And Dad Edge got started because like I to be honest, I had a really crazy childhood. I'm happy to dive into the details of that if you want to hear it. But I really wanted to be a good father because of how I was raised and how I was brought up, and it was like a revolving door of toxic father figures that it was crazy. And but I wasn't showing up well. I wasn't the most patient guy in the world. I wasn't the most approachable guy in the world. I got all my validation and attaboys in the workplace, and just sort of did fatherhood from an arm's length, if that makes sense. And it wasn't that yeah, looking back, I don't know why I did that at the time, but looking back on it, I know why I did it now. And I thought to myself that if I didn't get too entrenched in fatherhood, I couldn't screw it up too bad. Like that was literally my view. And so this is a very defeating feeling, especially when you've only got one shot at doing this. You only got one shot at being a father. And to be quite honest, like the journey, it doesn't even last that long. It's gone in a blink of an eye. I remember when my 18-year-old was born and he just turned 18. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I have an adult kid now. Like where did that even go? But I'll tell you, like it's what we teach our guys is living that life that we truly, truly want. Meaning like we're the leader in our family. We learn those skills, we teach those skills on how men can lead more effectively, in their families, within themselves, within their marriage. We help these guys with marriage, the connection with their wife, the communication, the intimacy, the whole 9 yards. We help them with being a more patient, resilient, calm, and responsive father, one that doesn't react, right? One that his kids want to spend time with him, his kids want to talk to him, and they feel that connection with their dad. So those are the things that we help men with. Just a plethora of others, but that is what we do.
Brother, you're speaking to me right now, especially when you're talking about it goes by so fast. I have my oldest, well, the time that we're recording this, my oldest is getting married in 8 days. And
Wow.
that's, yeah, she just turned 24 like last week, so having to adjust the age. So that speaks really well to me. I have 3 myself. My audience has heard this before. 24-year-old girl, 21-year-old boy, and then a 14-year-old girl. So I'm still in the thrones of fatherhood quite a bit. And I love that you're speaking to men in this way, because it is almost like we're on the job training as we become dads, and we inherit so much of what we want to do or what we think we should do from the influences that we have growing up. And those may be positive and those may be negative, or those may be, toxic. we need people to come alongside us, man. You know, iron sharpens iron. We need that regardless. So I love what you're doing there. So yeah, I heard in what you were saying, if I heard correctly, that it was part of your experiences growing up that has motivated you to want to do this. And I'd love for you to share with that some, because I think it would speak to a lot of people in our audiences who, you know, are men are saying, you know, hey, I don't have those good role models.
I don't. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't think the majority of us do have great role models growing up. I think we do, maybe to some degree, but a lot of us, I mean, I don't, all the guys I've spoken to over the years, there's a ton of us that didn't have those positive role models. And we actually, there's a lot of us that buy into the fact, well, if I didn't have a positive role model, like how in the world am I supposed to do this? In fact, like I will probably do to my kids what was done to me. And here's the interesting thing too, even men who don't want to do that, we still fall into that trap. I mean, that's exactly what happened to me. Like I had a laundry list when I first got married and we started having kids. I had a laundry list of things that I knew I was not going to do. And I thought that that was enough. And I think a lot of us think that that's enough, but that's not enough. And I'll give you an example. I mean, I just bought a brand new Pit Boss smoker from Lowe's, and I pick this thing up, pull it out of the box, and the instructions tell me how to put this thing together. Right? The instructions don't say here's 100 ways not to put this thing together, but best of luck. You'll figure it out. Right? You've seen a smoker before, so truly you can probably figure this out. But that's how a lot of us go about this thing called marriage. That's how a lot of us go about this thing called parenting, right? It's like I know all these things not to do, but we don't necessarily know what good looks like. So I think that we have an opportunity to learn, right? And that's what I had to do. That's what we do. What we do in our community is we teach our guys these skills. And I think that there's a term that we use in the group a lot, and that is be the pattern breaker. Be the pattern breaker, be the parent that you, if you came from that type of environment, be the parent that you wish you would have had, right? But learn how to do it. Don't just wing it, right? Anything that we do well in life, anything, whether you're a podcaster, whether you're in sales, whether you're in engineering, whether you're a CEO executive, like there's training and there's things you have to learn in order to do that role correctly. And fatherhood and marriage is no different. If you want to do that role correctly and execute it in the best way possible, and most importantly, too, is like when you know what to do and how to do it, you actually get to enjoy it more, right? You actually feel like this love of the game, right? Like this love of the game of marriage, this love of the game of being a parent, because it's exactly that. It's like if I am going to be an MVP in this, well, then I need to learn how to play that game, right? And that's how we approach it. And the thing that I like to challenge men with is that your past absolutely does not have to define who you are. So, like, I'll give you an example. We had a guy who applied to be a part of our group. This was years ago. And this guy, like, I got on a call with him, and I was like, so why are we talking? Why are you here? And he's like, I'm just an angry man. I'm very angry. I don't have patience, and I have genetic anger issues. And I'm like, "Oh, what?" He's like, I have genetic anger issues. Anger runs in my family. I'm like, please explain that." And I was so intrigued and curious. I'm just like, wow, I've never heard this. And he's like, well, my grandfather had anger issues. My dad has anger issues. My brothers have anger issues, and so do I. And I challenged this guy. I said, that's not genetic. Like, it's not genetic to have anger issues. Could you have a predisposition to being angry more often because of how you were raised in your environment? Sure. But you buying into that story that this is literally a part of your brain and operating system, we can flip that on its head as much as we want. I heard this amazing podcast guest say, and I can't remember who it was. It's going to drive me crazy now, but it was one of the most incredible analogies that I've heard. And I was like, man, this is so good. So the brain is the hardware, right? That's the hardware. Brain is like this 3.5 pound, lump of, just mush, right? That keeps us alive, right? That keeps us constantly looking out for danger and things that could hurt us, right? But that's the hardware, right? The brain is meant to keep you alive. That's the hardware. But the mind, that's the software. And the mind and the software can always be upgraded. We can
Ooh,
always learn. We can always learn new neural pathways. We can actually create new neural pathways and a way of operating that has nothing to do with how we were raised. And we've got so many men, man. We've had over 4,000 guys come into do life with us over the past 8 years. And man, we have proven that over and over and over again that when you upgrade that software, literally anything is possible.
I think some men are paralyzed at being parents because they have had these bad experiences, and so they're not actively doing parents. One thing that came to mind when you were speaking was a quote by Mr. Ziegler. It said, "Everything worth doing well, everything worth doing is worth doing poorly until you can learn to do it well." And I think some men are paralyzed to be parents, that so they don't engage, they don't try because they think they're going to mess up or they think they don't know what they have to do. Do you see that? Am I way off? Well, let me say that's from a personal experience to me that I think there were some areas that I didn't know what to do, and so I didn't engage in it in the way that I should have. When I probably just being there and showing love and support would have been the great first step.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's a lot of times that's really all it takes. Like
Ooh,
we we really don't it's funny. Like we actually the best conversations and connections I've had with my kids isn't necessarily by the things that I'm saying to them. Like it's not the lectures, it's not like my quote unquote words of wisdom or solutions to all your problems. It's actually when I get really really curious and I ask them really good questions, like and I got to be honest, like that is the way that I like to teach lessons. Like I want to guide my kids, through their own interpretation and perception of the world, but I'm guiding them through the questions. So like for instance, if my kid does something, wrong, right? Or he gets into trouble or he does something, like instead of me just completely laying out exactly all these things that are going to happen if he does this particular action and here are the consequences, like we like that's how we were brought up. It's like, well, if you do that, this is going to happen and then this is going to happen and this is going to happen and blah blah blah. Right. And kids, to be honest, like and not just kids, human beings, like think about
mhm.
that. We shut down when people come at us like that. Like all we're doing is like it literally sounds like want, 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 want. And it's what's actually happening is our amygdala is firing and it's like, how do I defend against this verbal attack? Even if it's quote unquote for our own good, right? Instead, what I like to do, and I know I'm getting like nerdy and everything, I like to engage my kids' prefrontal cortex. I want to get them thinking. I want to get them reflecting. I want to get them articulating, not me. So, like for instance, if my kid does something wrong, one of my kids lately, we have an agreement, and I'm happy to also explain agreements. Like we have rules, but we also have agreements, and what agreements mean in our house. But we have an agreement that my son, like, and he's 18 years old. We're like, look, you can have the privilege of having a phone, right? You can have the privilege of hanging out with your friends. Those privileges don't happen though unless you're doing certain things, right? So like there are certain things that they have to do. One of them being that they have to have C pluses or better in all their classes. That's just part of what they do, right? And so my son thought it'd be interesting to hide the fact that he had two Fs in classes. And I checked in with him. We established the standard, we established the agreements, and then we hold them to that standard. We hold them accountable. So a conversation that I had with my son was like, hey, how are your grades doing? It's our weekly check in. Like, how are your grades doing? How are this doing? How this, and this. And he's like, yeah, all the classes we got C. I got C's. I'm like, okay, cool, and no missing assignments. That's another part of the agreement. He's like, nope. And I'm like, and there was just something like very rarely do my kids ever lie to my wife and I. But my son had this thing that was going on for the weekend, and I think he wanted to just see if he could still like sneak away with this thing, right? Not letting us know he had Fs, which I didn't know he had Fs. And I was like, tell you what, I was like, let's look, crack open your Chromebook. Let me take a look at your dashboard. And I could tell he was like,
I
and
just
I was
got
like,
busted.
I know. I was like, is there something you want to tell me before we take a look? And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I currently have 2 Fs." He's like, "But dad, I'm working on getting them up because like, I wanna do this thing over the weekend." And I'm like, "So you knew that you had 2 Fs and you weren't gonna tell me until I asked to open up the laptop. Is that correct?" He's like, "Yeah." And so instead of like bulldozing him, right, and lecturing him, I just simply asked, how did you hope this was going to work out? What was your hope? Right. So I'll get really curious and I want him to reflect and actually answer those questions versus me being like, what the heck were you thinking? Like, what's wrong with you,
Mm.
man? Like, you don't keep this stuff from us. Like, instead, I'm like, what did you hope that was going to happen? And he was like, well, I was hopeful that you wouldn't ask and that I'd have my grades up in time, for this weekend. And to be honest, like, that's what I was hoping for. I was like, I get that. What do you think a better course of action would have been? Because now I think you can probably understand that my trust feels a bit betrayed right now. So, what are your thoughts on that? And he's like, I don't want to break trust with you. Like, and I wasn't trying. He's like, I really wasn't trying to lie. He's like, I just thought I had some time to get these grades up before our thing this weekend. And I was like, I get that. And I go, what do you think is the best thing we should do right now? And dude, I'll tell you, like, I was shocked at his answer. But he's like, I don't think you should allow me to go to the thing this weekend.
Wow,
And I'm like,
that's insightful.
it was. And but the thing is like engaging them. And the cool thing too is like he said it, I didn't. And to be honest, like there was a part of me that I was going to give him an opportunity to get those grades up. And I said, you know what? I was like, if that's what you think the right next thing is, then I agree with that. And if that's what you think that is fair, I agree with that. Did I think it was a little extreme and was I ready to do something that extreme? No, I wasn't. But he was. So I wanted to honor that. And I mean, I don't know if he'll ever know that my strategy was not to take that away and to give him an opportunity, but
I'm gonna email him a link to this episode so he'll
you
know. So,
should.
yeah.
You should. But I thought that that was kind of remarkable and that's the way I like to engage. I like even when it comes to consequences, like I do like to actually engage my kids because I get that experience quite a bit. They're actually harder on themselves with a consequence than the consequence that I was planning on giving them. So I think that that's another fascinating thing.
I'm wondering if there's someone listening to us, and this thought came to my mind is, hey, I've not been doing this, and my kids are trained the other way of me lecturing. And if I start this, they may not respond. What kind of words
Mhm.
of encouragement or instruction can we do to come alongside these fathers and help them? Because I can imagine a dad trying this the first time and not getting anything, getting that blank look from a kid and immediately thinking, this is not working. Those people are crazy. I'm going back to, getting a reaction because I know what to say to get a reaction. To move the ball, I know what to do. What do we say to them to come alongside them and encourage them?
Well, first of all, I think that you have to do one thing really, really well before you start there. And that is you have to establish connection with your kids before you can get to that step in my personal opinion. So like we hold more credibility as parents if the kids know that we are more than just a parent slash dictator, like I'm the I run the show here, that kind of thing. Like getting really, really into their life, like doing life with them, like getting really interested in the things that they're interested in, having conversations around the things that they like to talk about, getting really, really curious about their friends and their interests and why they like to do the things that they do, and all these other things that I think are really, really cool. I think that is the first step always is you got to create connection.
You're speaking my words when you said connection, because that's actually a topic that I'm writing on for an upcoming book as well for ours is working through connection.
Yeah.
That's that's sometimes difficult for dads to do. I don't think my dad ever really established his connection with me. He was a good role model father, but not a good engaging connection. He did not do those types of things. But if you look for his father, he was so much more of a man of integrity, sought God in his life as a person of faith and a believer in Christ, and conveyed that to me. But he was not a connection person on this. So I'm glad we're going there because that's important. Let's start from there. Any advice for those men who are how to start that connection, how to be curious at different phases of their life? We got when I teach a parenting class, Larry, I try to talk to them, whether it's littles, middles, and bigs, which, the littles are up until maybe around 10 or 9, and the middles are, for maybe 10 to 14, and then bigs are, 15 and really 21, 22, depending on when they leave. So if we use that, let's give these guys some advice. I hope there's somebody hungry to hear us.
And just so, just I want to make sure I'm answering the question. Advice on the
Yeah.
age group, or
On
or
the
what?
connection, of being able to connect with them
Yeah.
at those different age groups.
So, I haven't actually created like a landing page yet for this, or a way for guys to get it, but I have created the resource, and it's
Cool.
called Questions for the Car. And we called it. It's a PDF. It's called Questions for the Car. I'm happy to just send it to you, and you can send it out to your listeners if you want. But it's questions that you can use. It's 30 questions for certain age groups. So, like for instance, 5 to 8, and then 9 to 12, and then teenagers, right? So I'm a big fan of getting really curious with questions, because I think that that is what actually provides an incredible conversation. I think if you want to, you can actually use these 3 questions that I'll share with you at any age, and I'll give you all the psychological reasons why they're so powerful, and why I love to use them. So, first question is, most people will come home from work, or they'll see their kids, and the first thing they ask is, what do you think that they ask, James?
How was your day?
How was your day? Right. Now, here's what I'll tell you. I'm gonna give you some tough love, and I'm gonna give you some love at the same time. Here's the love. The love is that question comes from a really great intentional place. You know why? Because dads are like, "How was your day?" Like, "Man, just talk to me. Like, I would love to hear all about it. Please just tell me all about your day." Like, that's genuinely the heart of where that question comes from, right? It's because a dad or a mom, it doesn't matter, but like, we want that connection. However, the question itself, here's the tough love. The question itself is terrible,
Hmm.
because it takes no thought to ask that question, and it takes zero thought to actually answer it, because we'll get one word answers: fine, good, crazy, boring, right? Whatever. Instead, you can actually just simply reframe that question, and I'll give you all the psychological reasons why. So I like to ask my kids 3 questions per day. Here's the first one: what was the best part of your day? So what I'm doing with that question, and I'll ask it several different ways. I won't ask them what the best part of your day is every day, but I'll say, "Hey, tell me something about your day that you're proud of. Tell me something about your day that made you laugh. Tell me something. Tell me about a time today where you were kind to somebody. Tell me a time today where, someone was kind to you, right? Or we helped somebody." Basically, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help that kid dive into gratitude, and for them to tell me something that they're proud of. Because when you train a kid to do that, because we're always looking for the negative as human beings, but if we can train a kid day in and day out to look for the good, right? A high point moment, something that we're proud of, that's going to train that kid into gratitude. And here's the other thing too: as soon as they tell you, like, how much fun is it, and how cool of a connection and conversation is it when you can tell somebody that you care about something really cool that happened,
Yeah.
right? It's like, "Hey, I can't wait to tell you this. Like, this just happened," right? So, and then whatever they tell me, because I'll get a variety of different answers. I mean, some days it's just like lunch, and I'm like, "Okay, tell me why lunch was so much fun for you." And then I'll get a story. I'll be like, "Oh, Nathaniel was crazy at lunch today. He did something that was so funny and blah blah blah." And then I'll hear about it, right? So I'm like, and I'll laugh with them. I was like, "That's hilarious." Or like, they'll tell me something like they got an A on the test or whatever it is, right? And I'll match that energy, be like, "Oh my gosh, man, that's amazing. You must feel so proud. You must feel on top of the world," something like that. Like, give me some nucks, right? So immediately that energy is there. That's question number one. Question number two, and I love to train the kids this way because it really trains them on a few different things. I love to ask the question, "What did you fail at today? What'd you learn?" Right? So what'd you fail at? What'd you learn? Or what was something that was so challenging for you today, but you got through it? How'd you get through it? Basically, what I'm trying to do with that question is a few different things. Number one, instill a growth mindset into my kids. I want them to know that failure is not the end of any road. It's the beginning of learning, right? So, like, and a failure isn't the end of the world. It's actually, well, what do we learn? What do we do different from here on out? And that question always elicits incredible conversation. Now, here's what I can tell you from a connection standpoint. I've got 2 teenagers, and I can honestly tell you that I'm a blessed man, because they literally tell me everything. I mean, there are times I have to really poke and prod, like I did with my son who had the 2 F's, right? But they will come clean. Like, I'm just like, sometimes I'm so blown away. I'm like, I cannot believe
Mm.
like the honesty that these kids have. Like, I would never tell my mom that or dad that, right? But the cool thing is they've had reps with me day in and day out, that when they tell me something tough, like, And here's the thing, they'll be like, "Dad, I got an F on the science test." And here's what I'll do. This is where I get again get very, very curious with them. I don't come down on them, right? Because they're coming down on themselves more than I can, right? And I'm not in my situation, I'm not worried like it's not a drive thing or a motivation thing. It's probably like they either didn't study enough or they just didn't know the material or whatever. It doesn't matter. But like I want to know what did they learn from the experience, right? So what I'll do in that when they tell me that is I will acknowledge and appreciate them for their bravery. So I'll be like,
Mm.
"Ooh, man." I was like, "Bro," I was like, "That took some courage to tell me, huh?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, yeah, it did." And I'll be like, "Well, you know what?" I was like, "That took courage. Good on you for that." I was like, I'm curious though, like, what do you think happened? Like, why do you think you got the F? Tell me about that. Also, I try to stay away from the word why. So I usually say something, and I know I just used it there, but normally I'm like, well, tell me more. Tell me more what happened. Tell me what you think you would have done different, something like that. And then like I'll see this. I'll get the kid thinking because all they're thinking about is the F. And they'll be like, you know, the test was on 5 chapters. And to be honest, like I knew 3 of them. And I really didn't study those last 2 chapters that much because to be honest, like I was just burnt out and I didn't want to study. And I thought I knew it enough that I'd get an okay grade. I really did. And I'm like, you know what? That's great. That's great awareness. Like, and it's great for you to admit that. I was like, so if you had to do this all over again, like what would you do different? And they'd be like, I would have studied a little bit longer. I definitely would not have neglected those last 2 chapters because that was dumb. I should have done that. But if I had to do it all over again, I would have studied all 5 chapters. I probably would have taken a little bit more time studying, maybe even asked you to quiz me if I needed it. But like I would have just done that. And then I'll just ask them and be like, well, when's your next test? And they'll be like, oh, I actually got one next Friday. And then I'll just ask them, I'll be like, well, based on what you've told me and based on what you've learned, like, what are you going to do different to prepare for that one? And dude, they will just lay out the plan. Like, and instead of me being like, this is what you're going to do, and this is how you're going to do it, and this is how we do it in this house, right? And I'll just then praise them for the plan. And I'll be like, that's a great idea, man. Like, and what support do you need from me? Like, how can I support you with this? And sometimes they'll be like, you know what? I'm good. I got the plan. Or sometimes they'll be like, you know what? On Thursday night, can you check in with me? Maybe we can review a few things, like just to make sure I got it. I'm like, yeah, I got you. So that's
Wow.
because here's the thing. I want those reps in. I do that with my 8-year old. I do that with my 10-year old. I've done it for years with my older ones. But here's why I do that. As we all know, as kids get older, the stakes get higher, the consequences get
Hmm.
crazier, right? And what I can tell you is that I want my kid who's at a party and maybe they just tried alcohol for the first time, or maybe they tried drugs for the first time, and now they have a decision to make. Do I get behind the wheel of this car? Or do I call my dad? Now, I grew up in an environment, and I know a lot of people did, of like, that's the last person I'm going to call, like, because that guy is going to, have my rear end, right? But I want them to be like, I'm gonna call my dad because I've had, and not that they're going to articulate this, but they're gonna have rep after rep, experience after experience of me, holding space for them in a situation where they otherwise wouldn't have told me something, right? I want to be that phone call. And then the third question is, I call this the Netflix to be continued because you always want to end the conversation off, I think, on a good note, and that is, what are you most excited about tomorrow, or what are you most excited about for this week, or something like that, right? So my oldest son had an interview this past week to be what's called the drum major for the high school marching band, where he
Hmm.
actually gets to
Yeah.
stand on the podium and leads everybody. And so he came home the next day. He told me, he was like, I got drum major interviews tomorrow. He's like, I'm so excited, but I'm really nervous. So he walks in the house, and what do you think the first thing I'm going to ask him? I'm like, dude, how'd the interview go? Like, tell me, man. Like, so happy and excited for him. And like, that's where a kid, is just like, oh my gosh, like he remembered, like, and he's interested, and this guy like really is wanting to do life with me, right? He's not just checking the box and how was your day? Oh yeah, that's right. I
Yeah.
forgot you had that thing. So I think that those 3 questions for any age are great questions, and that's all the reasoning behind it.
And I love that you added the question in there as your backup, not backup question, but your secondary question for all three of those. Tell me more.
Tell me
Bob
more. Yeah.
Tiede, who is who coins himself as the question man, who worked for Crew for as one of their leaders nationally for decades and stuff. He's written many books about the power of questions, and he said that is the most powerful question a leader, a parent, a spouse can have, is when they're engaging with someone, is to say, well, tell me more, or some form of that, to encourage that. That if you run out of anything else to say in life, or anything, and nothing comes to mind, no brilliant things, just to say, tell me more. I love that, Larry. I love that. You think
Yeah.
do you think there's dads that are listening and saying, is this too late for me? My kid's
Oh
16,
God, no.
17,
No, no, no.
19, 20, 20, my 21-year-old, is it too late for me?
The answer to that is an absolute hell no. It's never too late. It really isn't. I'll give you a real world example if you want. I
Yes.
didn't meet my biological father or establish a relationship with him until I was 30, and
Mm,
that was by accident. And that's a whole story in of itself. My mom and biological father were married very young. They had me, and then my dad and mom had a horrible divorce. My dad left. No recollection of my dad whatsoever. And my mom got remarried when I was 4. That guy was around until I was 10. And then I had a very brief 6-month relationship with my biological father when I was 12. He was remarried at the time, had a 2-year-old son, another one on the way. It was a brief relationship of about 6 months. After like 6 months, I think it just kind of got too complicated. And we went our separate ways, which really sucked. And then I ran into him by accident when I was 30. And then we've had a relationship ever since. So he's a great guy, very successful business owner, has been married for 45 years. I have 2 younger half brothers. Like, he's got a great life. He's a great guy. But I'll tell you, even at 30 years old, when my dad is interested in my life, even as a grown man, like, I'm going to be 49 years old this year. Even as a grown man, when my dad like asks me about my life or asks me just questions because he's genuinely curious and he's a caring father, like, dude, that feels really great to me at 48 years old. Like,
yeah.
so if you have a 16-year-old, like, it is never, ever, ever, ever too late. The only time it's ever too late is if you've never done it and you wait because you think it's too late. So don't buy into that lie. It is absolutely not true.
I hope people are hearing this. I hope they're not just thinking that we're speaking words, but we're speaking from heart on here. That it isn't never too late on that. I had a interview last year where our father wrote a book about the drive home, where he was talking about how to how to handle that drive home for an athlete. When the athlete has disappointed you, and you as a dad are like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, and you have all those dad reactions. And he wanted to kind of reframe how we can engage with our young athletes as they are growing, and we can support them. And I talked to him about the fact, I said, hey, where were you 10 years ago? When my son was just in the early becoming an athlete, so that I could have learned these things here. He was like, it's never too late to go back and establish those things. So, man, I love that. All right. I hope, Larry, that there's some people in our audience right now who are thinking, I want to learn more. I want to know more. I want to. So I know you've got a book that is on the horizon, The Spirit of Fatherhood. Tell them a little bit about what that entails. That can be a resource to help them as they, navigate being a father.
Yeah, and thank you for that. This is actually my fourth book, and it's different. This was a stretch for me, actually, and in a very good way. So, faith is a big part of my life. It has been now since 2020. And I was sought out by a publisher to write a book on a faith-based approach to fatherhood, and I just did not even think I was the guy for that one. But I said yes to it, and I wrote the book, and it's written in a way that, there's definitely some faith-based elements in there. There's also some earthly skills that we talk about, like that we talked about today, like how you can better connect with your wife and your kids. And it's got elements in there of forgiveness, forgiving yourself, for forgiving people in your life. It's got ways to parent, ways to connect, all these different things in it. But yeah, it's called The Spirit of Fatherhood, and the pre-orders are on May 28th. Official launch is on Father's Day.
Hmm.
But it's written by an imperfect father finding his way for an imperfect father trying to find his way. And yeah, I'm really excited about this book coming out.
Well, I look forward to it. What other resources do you have, or ways that they can connect with you if they really want to up their game as both dads and as leaders of their families?
So I mean, you can always start with the podcast. I always joke around that the podcast, like that'll keep you busy for years. Although I always encourage men. I was like, don't think listening to a podcast will change your life, because what a podcast and even a book, right? Podcasts and books and YouTube videos and that kind of thing. I mean, they're great, right? They give you ideas. They give you some, I think, strategy, right? But the execution of those ideas and strategies, that when it's just information in without implementation out, it's and most importantly, consistent implementation over and over daily, every single day. That's where guys, I think, get tripped up, right? They're like, well, I'm listening to all these podcasts, or I'm listening to this or that. Like, it's great. I would say, though, the best thing to do, and this is going to sound self serving because we have a community, a group coaching environment, but I honestly think it is the best money, time, resources, and energy that you are going to spend. It is the most meat on the bone for you to go out and learn something new, and then to go out and do it, and then to have a community of men help you through the implementation, hold you accountable. When you start to go do new things, it's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel weird. Most people, if they don't have accountability or community holding them to a high level, they tend to just not do it anymore. It's like, oh, it felt too weird, or I didn't do this. Like, I can't even tell you like how many times, like on social, like I'll talk about the 3 questions that you and I were talking about today. And guys are like, I tried it and it didn't work. And I'm like, well, yeah. And I'm like, well, how often did you try? Well, I tried it once. And I'm like, you got to do this. Like,
Yeah,
you got to do it every day, like
yeah.
every single day. It's not a one and done.
That's
So
what I
like,
thought was that's what was the purpose of my question is I could hear a dad saying that. Oh, I
yeah, oh
tried it.
yeah,
They didn't say
tried it.
anything, so they're
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, you have to be consistent. So that's the thing. And we've got the Dad Edge Alliance for that. That's our mastermind group. If you go to thedadedge.com/mastermind, we actually have 2 different programs. We have the Dad Edge Business Boardroom. That's for our business owners. We have a special program just for them. And then we have the Alliance, which is, I would say, more our basic program, but it's for guys who are more career guys. But we do cater differently to business owners, because quite frankly, we have different challenges, and we have different
Mhm.
things that come at us, and we're leading teams and people and companies and customers, and it's a little different. So that's why we have the 2 different programs.
Mm. I love our conversation today.
Me too. But yeah,
Um,
everything is at thedadedge.com.
Not only do I love it because the timing of it, the timing of conversations I've had with my son this week, with my daughter getting married coming up, with how that is structured is causing my wife and I to kind of look at our and reflect over 30 plus years of marriage ourselves, what we did well, what we as we give knowledge, what I have done well as I talk to my future son-in-law, and what I did badly as I talk to my future son-in-law as well. So this could not come at a better time for me to have these conversations. If
So glad it's helpful.
the entire audience doesn't get anything out of it, James has learned more today. It's been worth it's been wonderful. So, and listen, audience, if you want to connect with it, the links to everything Larry discussed is going to be in the show notes. So if you're listening, just go to your favorite podcast app and you'll find it. If you're watching this, you know the drill. Go on YouTube, look straight down. There it is in the show notes. All you have to do is click and you can see these. Larry, thank you again for being our guest today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And audience, thank you for sticking with us. Listen, if you stuck with us for at least 40 minutes, you found some value in what you're hearing. You just didn't leave this on just because it was entertaining. You found value. You found some information that can help you. So please like, share, and comment on this. And the most important aspect of that is sharing, because someone that you know needs to hear this message. Someone that you know needs this content, needs to be engaged in the Dad Edge Alliance, needs these resources in their life. So please share with them so that we can spread this message. And we'll see everybody really soon again on the Generation Youth Podcast.